Okay, so as per the coalition agreements, the government has agreed to introduce legislation to potentially allow for a referendum on a 4-year term for Parliament, and we'll be introducing a bill very shortly into Parliament and then sending it off to Select Committee. Now, this is a discussion that we've had as a country several times before, and basically the arguments for a 4-year term are that it gives governments a longer time to develop and progress an agenda, and less chopping and changing, which is one of the downsides of frequent elections. Some people will argue that the first year of a government takes a lot of organisation, and then the third year is you're looking forward to an election, and really that middle year is the best year to get things done, and so a 4-year term would potentially double that period. The arguments against it have always consistently been that New Zealand doesn't have an upper house, doesn't have a Supreme Court that strikes down legislation, and so a more regular election is justified on that basis. And both of those arguments are quite good, and so we're very keen for a Select Committee process to work its way through that. Also, part of the coalition agreement was that we would introduce a bill drafted by the ACT Party, and so what that does is effectively say that a Parliament or a government can have a 4-year term, but in order to do that it has to arrange the select committees in a different way, which makes it stronger for the opposition to hold the government into account. So that is in effect trying to deal with that argument around the checks and balances in our system. So the legislation as introduced will have that, which is to say you can have a 3-year term, or if Parliament introduces changes to the select committees, it can be extended to 4 years. And that's something we can consider during the select committee process. No government decisions have been made yet as to whether the bill will actually progress past the select committee and move on to a referendum, but we'll be looking to make decisions on that certainly before the end of this year, so that if there was to be a referendum, that could be organised. Happy to answer any questions.
Minister, is there public appetite, do you think, for 4-year terms?
Well, look, I think many people are in favour. When you talk about it, there is some interest in it, but ultimately that's something I think we can gauge through the Select Committee process, and I'm sure people such as you will be doing polling on the topic, and we'll get a sense of how much enthusiasm there is for it. I've just come back from I met with my counterparts in Australia last week. All the Australian states have a 4-year term, but the Australian Federation has a 3-year term, and they've made a pretty good case that actually 4 years is better. We're not really particularly pushing a particular agenda. I think we're very much open to what the feedback is over the Select Committee process.
Is it too hard to get enough done in 3 years?
Governments have got a lot done, and we intend to get a lot done over our 3 years, but it certainly is a reality that the 3-year term does come around quickly, and there is, in the 3rd year you're starting to think about the election, and there is an argument that an extended period would give governments longer to progress an agenda, and then ultimately people get to judge that at the end of the 4-year period.
Just on the citizens' arrest proposal, I wanted to ask you again, did you actually go to retailers and speak to them about this proposal? Because Retail NZ has come out and said that the majority of its members strongly oppose the changes. So who was spoken to?
Oh, well, look, this was a recommendation from the Retail Advisory Group that Sonny Koshel has been leading. He's been talking to a range of people right across the retail sector. But what you've got to remember is that retail is extremely broad, and there are the big corporations at one end, and then there's the small single-operated dairies at the other end. And these proposals particularly have been something that the smaller dairy owners have been pushing for a long time. And the larger corporations, as I said yesterday, may be more interested in the opportunities through very expensive surveillance and facial recognition, but that's something that wouldn't necessarily work for the smaller ones.
You said yourself, though, this is for retailers, and we've got the body that represents retailers.
It doesn't represent all retailers. It represents a slice of retailers.
Did it concern you what Destiny Church leader Ryan Tamaki said on Twitter, that he's excited that he's about to receive increased powers to police where law and order has failed?
Well, look, I mean, if the judge of any government proposal is whether Brian Tamaki agrees with it or not, I think that's a very low bar, and so I'm not particularly interested in his views on this.
Minister, what does National make of the Act bill that's currently drafted? What's your perspective on it, and would you prefer to just have a referendum straight on a 3-year, 4-year term without the complication of the Select Committee caveat?
Yes, look, I think that's something that we'd be very open to, and so one of the things that the Select Committee will be looking at is this arrangement where it's not exactly clear whether you're going to have a 3-year term or a 4-year term. It depends on what the Parliament does, whether that's suitable. It may well be that a much simpler arrangement is just to have a choice simply between a 3 and a 4-year term. And so we're very much open to that, and that may be what comes out of the Select Committee.
You haven't committed to supporting it beyond Select Committee. What's to say this won't just end up being another waste of time and money, as your critics have said, of the Treaty Principles Bill, which you're also not supporting past Select Committee?
I think, look, this is an issue that has bubbled away for many years, and people have consistently raised the challenges of the changes of direction when new governments come in. And yep, as you know, look across the Tasman, as I say, all the states have gone to a 4-year term. I think it's a reasonable question to ask, but as a government we're going to have to decide after the Select Committee process, do we think there is sufficient interest in it in order to progress a referendum, and like I say, we haven't made that decision yet, but we absolutely think it's worth having the discussion.
Would you be more or less likely to support it after Select Committee with or without that Act Party caveat of Select Committee?
Well, look, I'm not going to make a judgment on that yet. I think that is the purpose of the Select Committee, so we can hear the arguments laid out and see whether there is real enthusiasm for a change, and if there is, whether it should be in the way that's been designed in the bill, or whether a simpler, just binary choice between 3 or 4 years.
Minister, can you explain, just in the press release it says, a standard term of Parliament will remain at 3 years, but with the ability to extend the maximum term of Parliament to 4 years. What does that mean? Sorry, I don't quite understand.
Well, like I say, in the draft, in the bill that will be introduced, which is based on the Act proposal, it would say that the term would continue to be 3 years unless Parliament agreed to change the rules around select committees to give greater weight in those select committees to opposition parties. And it goes back to the most frequent opposition to 4-year terms has been the fact that New Zealand doesn't have an upper house and has relatively few checks and balances. And so the proposal is, if you go to a 4-year term, change the select committee rules. At the moment, the government tends to control most of the select committees, has the numbers on the select committees, and the proposal is to change that so that the opposition has control of the select committees and is in a more powerful position to hold the government of the day to account through that select committee process.
So you're saying that it could stay at 3 years if you didn't choose to do that select committee process?
That's right.
Okay.
Just to go, sorry.
Minister, I was just wondering, just on that, like, if it was to go through a select committee and they said, okay, does that mean in 2026 we could get back, like, put to votes like we had in 2020 with things like euthanasia and marijuana?
Yes, if the legislation is passed, and like I say, we haven't made a final decision to pass it, but if it was passed before the end of this year, we could have a referendum at the 2026 election. And if the referendum passed and we moved to a 4-year term, it would take effect from the following election.
And do you believe that other parties have similar consensus that it should go to 4 years?
Look, there'll be a range of views across Parliament, and so that's what we'll gauge during the Select Committee process.
Just to go back to citizens' arrest and the idea of reasonable force, the Police Association has said this morning that even police sometimes get that idea of reasonable force wrong. So how can we be sure that retailers and the public will know what reasonable force actually is?
Well, look, there are current rules in place already. They're very restricted and it can only happen at night. And so the idea of reasonable force is something that has been considered by the courts many times. And so ultimately, look, there are plenty of people who object to any of those changes. They argue for the status quo. And the only point I'd make to them is, well, you know, we're not contented with the status quo. We're not contented with the amount of violence that we have in the retail space and the level of retail crime, and so we're looking for suggestions and for answers. And I welcome the debate that is had about this, and it's a robust proposal, and people are fully entitled to have their views, and then we'll send this off to a select committee and we'll talk about that and come up with a sensible suggestion if there's going to be any changes. But our view is that we've got to do something different if we're going to have different outcomes in the retail crime space.
Are the public aware of what reasonable force means?
I think the average person can figure out that holding somebody, stopping them from carrying away stolen goods is a reasonable force, and everybody has to deal with the situation that they face on their circumstances.
Holding somebody, hurting somebody? Is that
No, you're not out there to hurt people. Any other questions on the four-year term?
Would you consider doing a conscious vote for MPs after the select committee process on the bill?
Well, ultimately, that would be a matter for the Speaker and for parties to decide. That could be one option.
Just one more as well on the legislation for four-year terms. If it was successful at a national level, would you consider doing it at a local level as well?
I think if the Parliament moved to a four-year term, there would be a pretty strong argument to move local government subsequently as well, but that's a separate discussion. It's not part of this legislation. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.